The service economy is difficult to photograph. There are no smokestacks roaring into the sky, no endless assembly lines that make power visible at a glance. Instead, there are airport slots and legal contracts, container scheduling and cloud servers, hotel nights and payment systems, arbitration rooms, financial terminals, software teams, ports that do not only move goods, but organize the movement itself. That is why this chart matters. It lets us watch one of the least visible and most powerful transformations in modern Asia. On one side, we track exports of services. That means the money countries earn by selling transport, travel, finance, insurance, telecom, software, consulting, logistics, and other intangible capabilities to the rest of the world. On the other side, we follow GDP per capita, the colder measure of how much economic weight exists behind each resident on average. Together, the pair tells a deep story. Which economies learned to sell coordination instead of only production? Which ones built prosperity on invisible systems? Which ones reached global scale? And which ones reached high living standards? Singapore is the hero, because no country in Asia turns organization into export power more clearly. It does not have the land of China. It does not have the population of India. It does not carry the cultural manufacturing machine of Japan or the giant industrial arc of South Korea. What it has is positioning and discipline. A city-state that learned to make every square kilometer work harder than seems fair. An island that behaves like an operating system for the region around it. When capital wants safety, shipping wants reliability, executives want a hub, or travelers want clean, frictionless movement, Singapore is already waiting with an answer. The beauty of this comparison is that the rivals are not small. China rises through sheer scale, adding more business services, transport flows, digital activity, and outward commercial links until even its invisible economy becomes enormous. India grows into a service superpower of its own through software, business process work, professional services, and a huge English-speaking talent base that plugs directly into global demand. Japan remains rich and sophisticated, but its growth is more mature and less explosive. South Korea combines advanced technology with cultural expansion and high-value business services. Hong Kong keeps the reflexes of a financial entrepot whose instincts were trained by decades of acting as a gateway. That means Singapore is not running alone at the top because of luck. It is running in a field of heavyweights. The country survives there because services reward something Asia has spent decades mastering: trust at speed. A plane can land on time almost anywhere. A service hub must do much more. It must clear cargo, settle payments, host headquarters, coordinate insurers, welcome travelers, process data, and keep the whole choreography smooth enough that foreign clients forget how much could have gone wrong. Singapore sells that feeling of controlled complexity better than almost anyone on Earth. The decade opens with symbolism all around Marina Bay. Marina Bay Sands rises like an announcement that the city is no longer content with being merely efficient. It wants spectacle, too. Soon, Gardens by the Bay adds a second layer to the same message. Singapore is building not just for residents or bankers, but for the global imagination. This matters because service exports are not only about code and contracts. They are also about whether people want to route their journeys, conferences, investments, and regional strategies through your city instead of someone else's. At the same time, the state doubles down on what made it powerful in the first place: administration, connectivity, and a willingness to design the future before the future becomes urgent. India tells a very different story. Its service export engine rises from scale rather than compact perfection. Millions of workers, back offices, software firms, consultants, and outsourced operations turn the country into one of the world's most important suppliers of digital labor and business support. India can produce giant export numbers without looking rich on a per-person basis, and that gap is one of the most important lessons on this chart. Large service exports do not automatically mean broad prosperity. They can also mean that a vast nation found a profitable edge before distributing the gains evenly. China reveals another path. At first glance, many people still read China mainly through factories, ports, steel, and physical trade. But this chart reminds us that the country has also been building a giant services layer around its manufacturing core. Finance, logistics, business services, transport, digital platforms, and the administrative muscle that surrounds industrial scale all begin to matter more over time. Japan sits in the comparison like an old master. Wealthy, highly organized, and deeply embedded in global commerce. It begins the period with immense service exports and one of the highest living standards in Asia. Yet Japan's line feels different from Singapore's. It is less about sudden ascent and more about defending position inside a mature economy. The challenge is not whether Japan can be sophisticated. That was answered long ago. The challenge is whether a mature society can accelerate in a region where younger systems are moving faster and where digital demand is redrawing the map of advantage. South Korea faces a related tension. It is technologically sharp, globally branded, and increasingly powerful in entertainment, electronics, and knowledge-intensive business. But it still has to fight for regional oxygen against giants larger than itself and hubs more specialized than itself. Then there is Hong Kong, whose role throughout much of the decade feels almost instinctive. It is a gateway that does not need to explain what gateways do. Capital arrives, deals are structured, regional headquarters cluster, professional services follow. For years, that formula looks enduring. Yet this chart also lets us see how gateway models come under pressure when the surrounding region changes. As mainland Chinese cities grow stronger, and as politics begins to press harder on the city, Hong Kong no longer operates in the same uncontested lane it once enjoyed. It remains wealthy and globally relevant, but the mood around its dominance becomes less automatic. Look below the leading group, and Asia becomes even more interesting. Thailand remains deeply tied to travel and hospitality, showing that services are not always digital or financial. Malaysia mixes manufacturing depth with transport and business services. The Philippines builds a recognizable strength in voice and business process outsourcing. Vietnam starts from a lower base, but keeps climbing as its economy becomes more integrated and confident. Indonesia grows with domestic scale, while Israel sells high-value expertise from a much smaller population. Saudi Arabia and Turkey appear in the wider field as reminders that the Asian service story includes pilgrimage, aviation, tourism, transport, finance, and geopolitically strategic location. Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka sit lower, but still show that the regional map is far broader than the familiar elite hubs. This is where GDP per capita changes the interpretation of everything. Singapore does not merely export services at scale. It does so while remaining one of the richest societies in the region. That means the city-state is not using services as a narrow development ladder. It has already climbed high and is still climbing. India, by contrast, shows how a country can become globally indispensable in services while remaining much poorer per person. China shows enormous scale, but not elite per capita prosperity. Japan and South Korea show advanced living standards, though their service export trajectories behave differently. Hong Kong stays rich, but more exposed to strategic shifts around it. The right side of the chart keeps asking the same question year after year. Is this service power translating into broad resident wealth, or is it mainly a sign of national scale and external competitiveness? For Singapore, the answer is unusually strong. Changi Airport expands. The Smart Nation push makes the state even more legible as a testbed for digital coordination. Tech platforms like Grab turn the city into a command point for Southeast Asian consumer infrastructure. Jewel Changi opens and demonstrates the Singapore method in pure form. Even the airport must become a branded urban experience, a place where transit, retail, engineering, and image merge into one machine of attraction. None of this is accidental decoration. It is part of the service export ecosystem. A hub wins when people route more movement through it, trust more assets inside it, and imagine more regional decisions being made from it. Then the pandemic arrives, and service economies learn how fragile invisible power can be. Flights vanish, hotels empty, conferences collapse. Regional headquarters stop moving people across borders with the old ease. For countries built partly on the sale of coordination itself, this is a direct hit to identity as much as revenue. Singapore enters a circuit breaker lockdown. Changi falls quiet. The whole premise of seamless movement is interrupted by a global emergency that treats connection as danger. Hong Kong suffers too. Thailand's tourism-heavy services are hammered. Even India, whose digital service model is less dependent on planes and hotel beds, moves through a world of uncertainty. Yet the recovery years reveal why service hubs matter so much. They do not simply wait for demand to return. They reorganize for it. Singapore launches vaccinated travel lanes, then reopens more broadly, then brings Terminal 2 fully back into operation after major upgrades. The message is unmistakable. This city intends to remain one of Asia's essential switching stations. By 2023, the chart rewards that determination. Singapore rises to the top of the regional field in service export value, ahead even of much larger countries. That is an extraordinary outcome. Not because Singapore became large, but because it proved that density, reliability, and strategic design can sometimes beat raw scale. The deeper lesson of the whole race is that Asia is no longer defined only by making things. It is increasingly defined by organizing flows. The region still manufactures, absolutely, but around those factories sits an expanding universe of ports, software teams, logistics contracts, legal structures, tourism systems, payment rails, financial centers, cloud infrastructure, and professional expertise. Services are the nervous system around the visible body of trade. Singapore became the hero of this story because it understood that earlier than almost everyone else and built a national model around it. India showed that talent scale can rewrite the map. China showed that industrial size eventually breeds service size. Japan and South Korea showed how advanced societies defend and adapt their positions. Hong Kong showed both the power and the vulnerability of the gateway model. When the bars move across the screen, they are not only measuring money. They are measuring how convincingly a country can make complexity feel easy for the rest of the world. That is the real export on offer here. Singapore ends the period not merely rich, not merely connected, but almost archetypal. A small territory that turned trust, speed, and coordination into one of the most formidable invisible economies on the planet. In the age of services, that may be one of the greatest strategic advantages a nation can possess.